49. Lilies That Fester. Published in 20th Century, Volume 157, April 1955, this essay was reproduced in The World's Last Night, US 1960, and They Asked for a Paper, Geoffrey Bless 1962, and is now in Christian Reunion 1990. In the Cambridge number of the 20th Century, 1955, Mr. John Allen asked why so many people go to such lengths to prove to us that really they are not intellectuals at all, and certainly not cultured. I believe I know the answer. Two parallels may help to ease it into the reader's mind. We all know those who shudder at the word refinement as a term of social approval. Sometimes they express their dislike of this usage by facetiously spelling it refinement, with the implication that it is likely to be commonest in the mouths of those whose speech has a certain varnished vulgarity. And I suppose we can all understand the shudder, whether we approve it or not. He who shudders feels that the quality of mind and behaviour which we call refined is nowhere less likely to occur than among those who aim at it, and talk much about refinement. Those who have this quality are not obeying any idea of refinement when they abstain from swaggering, spitting, snatching, triumphing, calling names, boasting or contradicting. These modes of behaviour do not occur to them as possibles. If they did, that training and sensibility which constitute refinement would reject them as disagreeables, without reference to any ideal of conduct. Just as we reject a bad egg without reference to its possible effect on our stomachs. Refinement, in fact, is a name given to certain behaviour from without. From within, it does not appear as refinement. Indeed, it does not appear, does not become an object of consciousness at all. Where it is most named, it is most absent. I produce my next parallel with many different kinds of reluctance, but I think it too illuminating to be omitted. The word religion is extremely rare in the New Testament or the writings of mystics. The reason is simple. Those attitudes and practices to which we give the collective name of religion are themselves concerned with religion hardly at all. To be religious is to have one's attention fixed on God and on one's neighbour in relation to God. Therefore, almost by definition, a religious man, or a man when he is being religious, is not thinking about religion. He hasn't the time. Religion is what we, or he himself at a later moment, call his activity from outside. Of course, those who disdain the words refinement and religion may be doing so from bad motives. They may wish to impress us with the idea that they are well-bred or holy. Such people are regarding chatter about refinement or religion simply as symptomatic of vulgarity or worldliness, and eschew the symptom to clear themselves from the suspicion of the disease. But there are others who sincerely, and I believe rightly, think that such talk is not merely a symptom of, but a cause, active in producing that disease. The talk is inimical to the thing talked of, likely to spoil it where it exists, and to prevent its birth where it is unborn. Now, culture seems to belong to the same class of dangerous and embarrassing words. Whatever else it may mean, it certainly covers deep and genuine enjoyment of literature and the other arts. By using the word enjoyment, I do not mean to beg the vexed question about the role of pleasure in our experience of the arts. I mean frui, not delectare, as we speak of a man enjoying good health or an estate. And now, if I am certain of anything in the world, I am certain that while a man is, in this sense, enjoying Don Giovanni or the Oresteia, he is not caring one farthing about culture. Culture? The irrelevance of it. For just as to be fat or clever means to be fatter or cleverer than most, so to be called cultured must mean to be more so than most, and thus the very word carries the mind at once to comparisons and groupings and life in society. And what has all that to do with the horns that blow as the statue enters, or Clytemnestra crying, "Now you have named me aright"? In Howard's End, Mr. E. M. Forster excellently describes a girl listening to a symphony. She is not thinking about culture, nor about music, nor even about this music. She sees the whole world through the music. Culture, like religion, is a name given from outside to activities which are not themselves interested in culture at all, and would be ruined the moment they were. I do not mean that we are never to talk of things from the outside, but when the things are of high value and very easily destroyed, we must talk with great care, and perhaps the less we talk the better. To be constantly engaged with the idea of culture, and, above all, of culture as something enviable or meritorious, or something that confers prestige, seems to me to endanger those very enjoyments for whose sake we chiefly value it. If we encourage others or ourselves to hear, see, or read great art on the ground that it is a cultured thing to do, we call into play precisely those elements in us which must be in abeyance before we can enjoy art at all. We are calling up the desire for self-improvement, the desire for distinction, the desire to revolt from one group and to agree with another, and a dozen busy passions which, whether good or bad in themselves, are, in relation to the arts, simply a blinding and paralyzing distraction. At this point, some may protest that by culture they do not mean the enjoyments themselves, but the whole habit of mind which such experiences, reacting upon one another and reflected on, build up as a permanent possession. And some will wish to include the sensitive and enriching social life which, they think, will arise among groups of people who share this habit of mind. But this reinterpretation leaves me with the same difficulty. I can well imagine a lifetime of such enjoyments leading a man to such a habit of mind, but on one condition, namely, that he went to the arts for no such purpose. Those who read poetry to improve their minds will never improve their minds by reading poetry. For the true enjoyments must be spontaneous and compulsive, and look to no remoter end. The muses will submit to no marriage of convenience. The desirable habit of mind, if it is to come at all, must come as a byproduct, unsought. The idea of making it one's aim suggests that the shattering confidence which Goethe made to Eckermann, "In all my youthful amours, the object I had in view was my own ennoblement." To this, I presume, most of us would reply that, even if we believe a love affair can ennoble a young man, we feel sure that a love affair undertaken for that purpose would fail of its object, because, of course, it wouldn't be a love affair at all. So much for the individual. But the claims made for the cultured group raise an embarrassing question. What, exactly, is the evidence that culture produces among those who share it a sensitive and enriching social life? If by sensitive we mean sensitive to real or imagined affronts, a case could be made out. Horace noted long ago that bards are a touchy lot. The lives and writings of the Renaissance humanists and the correspondence in the most esteemed literary periodicals of our own century will show that critics and scholars are the same. But sensitive in that meaning cannot be combined with enriching. Competitive and resentful egoisms can only impoverish social life. The sensitivity that enriches must be of the sort that guards a man from wounding others, not of the sort that makes him ready to feel wounded himself. Between this sensitivity and culture, my own experience does not suggest any causal connection. I have often found it among the uncultured. Among the cultured, I have sometimes found it, and sometimes not. Let us be honest. I claim to be one of the cultured myself, and have no wish to foul my own nest. Even if that claim is disallowed, I have at least lived among them, and would not denigrate my friends. But we are speaking here among ourselves, behind closed doors. Frankness is best. The real traitor to our order is not the man who speaks, within that order, of its faults, but the man who flatters our corporate self-complacency. I gladly admit that we number among us men and women whose modesty, courtesy, fair-mindedness, patience in disputation, and readiness to see an antagonist's point of view are wholly admirable. I am fortunate to have known them. But we must also admit that we show as high a percentage as any group whatever of bullies, paranoiacs and poltroons, of backbiters, exhibitionists, mopes, milksops, and world-without-end bores. The loutishness that turns every argument into a quarrel is really no rarer among us than among the subliterate, the restless inferiority complex, stern to inflict, but not stubborn to endure, which bleeds at a touch but scratches like a wildcat, is almost as common among us as among schoolgirls. If you doubt this, try an experiment. Take any one of those who vaunt most highly the adjusting, cleansing, liberating and civilizing efforts of culture, and ask him about other poets, other critics, other scholars, not in the mass, but one by one and name by name. 9 times out of 10 he will deny of each what he claimed for all. He will certainly produce very few cases in which, on his own showing, culture has had its boasted results. Sometimes we suspect that he can think of only one. The conclusion most naturally to be drawn from his remarks is that the praise our order can most securely claim is that which Dr. Johnson gave to the Irish. They are an honest people. They never speak well of one another. It is then, at best, extremely doubtful whether culture produces any of those qualities which will enable people to associate with one another graciously, loyally, understandingly, and with permanent delight. When Ovid said that it softened our manners, he was flattering a barbarian king. But even if culture did all these things, we could not embrace it for their sake. This would be to use consciously and self-consciously, as means to extraneous ends, things which must lose all their power of conducing to those ends by the very fact of being so used. For many modern exponents of culture seem to me to be impudent, in the etymological sense. They lack pudor. They have no shyness where men ought to be shy. They handle the most precious and fragile things with the roughness of an auctioneer, and talk of our most intensely solitary and fugitive experiences as if they were selling us a Hoover. It is all really very well summed up in Mr. Allen's phrase in the 20th century, the faith in culture. A faith in culture is as bad as a faith in religion. Both expression imply a turning away from those very things which culture and religion are about. A culture, as a collective name for certain very valuable activities, is a permissible word. But culture hypostatized, set up on its own, made into a faith, a cause, a banner, a platform, is unendurable. For none of the activities in question cares a straw for that faith or cause. It is like a return to early Semitic religion, where names themselves were regarded as powers. Now a step further. Mr. Allen complained that, not content with creeping out of earshot when we can hear the voices of certain culture-mongers no longer, we then wantonly consort, or pretend that we consort, with the lowest of the lowbrows, and affect to share their pleasures. There are at this point a good many allusions which go over my head. I don't know what an AFN is. I am not fond of cellars, and modern whisky suits neither my purse, my palate, nor my digestion. But I think I know the sort of thing he has in mind, and I think I can account for it. As before, I will begin with a parallel. Suppose you had spent an evening among very young and very transparent snobs who were feigning a discriminating enjoyment of a great port, though anyone who knew could see very well that, if they had ever drunk port in their lives before, it came from a grocer's. And then suppose that on your journey home you went into a grubby little tea-shop, and there heard an old body in a feather boa say to another old body with a smack of her lips, "That was a nice cup of tea, dearie, that was. Did me good." Would you not, at that moment, feel that this was like fresh mountain air? For here, at last, would be something real. Here would be a mind really concerned about that in which it expressed concern. Here would be pleasure. Here would be undebauched experience, spontaneous and compulsive, from the fountainhead. A live dog is better than a dead lion. In the same way, after a certain kind of sherry party, where there have been cataracts of culture, but never one word or one glance that suggested a real enjoyment of any art, any person, or any natural object, my heart warms to the schoolboy on the bus who is reading fantasy and science fiction, rapt and oblivious of all the world beside. For here also I should feel that I had met something real and live and unfabricated. Genuine literary experience, spontaneous and compulsive, disinterested. I should have hopes of that boy. Those who have greatly cared for any book whatever may possibly come to care some day for good books. The organs of appreciation exist in them. They are not impotent. And even if this particular boy is never going to like anything severer than science fiction, even so. The child whose love is here at least doth reap one precious gain, that he forgets himself. I should still prefer the live dog to the dead lion, perhaps even the wild dog to the overtame poodle or peak. I should not have spent so many words on answering Mr. Allen's question, neither of us matters sufficiently to justify it, unless I thought that the discussion led to something of more consequence. This I will now try to develop. Mr. Forster feels anxious because he dreads theocracy. And now, if he expects to see a theocracy set up in modern England, I myself believe his expectation to be wholly chimerical. But I wish to make it very clear that, if I thought the thing in the least probable, I should feel about it exactly as he does. I fully embrace the maxim which he borrows from a Christian, that all power corrupts. I would go further. The loftier the pretensions of the power, the more meddlesome, inhuman, and oppressive it will be. A theocracy is the worst of all possible governments. All political power is at best a necessary evil, but it is least evil when its sanctions are most modest and commonplace, when it claims no more than to be useful or convenient, and sets itself strictly limited objectives. Anything transcendental or spiritual, or even anything very strongly ethical, in its pretensions is dangerous, and encourages it to meddle with our private lives. Let the shoemaker stick to his last. Thus the Renaissance doctrine of divine right is for me a corruption of monarchy, Rousseau's general will of democracy, racial mysticisms of nationality. And theocracy, I admit, and even insist, is the worst corruption of all. But then I don't think we are in any danger of it. What I think we are really in danger of is something that would be only 1 degree less intolerable, and intolerable in almost the same way. I would call it chariontocracy. Not the rule of the saints, but the rule of the witty, the charming, the Hôtel de Rambouillet, the wits, the polite, the souls, the apostles, the sensitive, the cultured, the integrated, or whatever the latest password may be. I will explain how I think it could come about. The old social classes have broken up. 2 results follow. On the one hand, since most men, as Aristotle observed, do not like to be merely equal with all other men, we find all sorts of people building themselves into groups within which they can feel superior to the mass. Little unofficial, self-appointed aristocracies. The cultured increasingly form such a group. Notice their tendency to use the social term vulgar of those who disagree with them. Notice that Mr. Allen spoke of rebels against, or deserters from, this group as denying not that they are intellectual, but that they are intellectuals, not hiding a quality, but deprecating inclusion in a class. On the other hand, inevitably there is coming into existence a new real ruling class, what has been called the managerial class. The coalescence of these 2 groups, the unofficial, self-appointed aristocracy of the cultured, and the actual managerial rulers, will bring us to chariontocracy. But the 2 groups are already coalescing because education is increasingly the means of access to the managerial class. And of course, education, in some sense, is a very proper means of access. We do not want our rulers to be dunces. But education is coming to have a new significance. It aspires to do, and can do, far more to the pupil than education, except perhaps that of the Jesuits, has ever done before. For one thing, the pupil is now far more defenceless in the hands of his teachers. He comes increasingly from businessmen's flats or workmen's cottages, in which there are few books or none. He has hardly ever been alone. The educational machine seizes him very early and organizes his whole life, to the exclusion of all unsuperintended solitude or leisure. The hours unsponsored, uninspected, perhaps even forbidden, reading, the ramblings, and the long, long thoughts in which those of luckier generations first discovered literature and nature and themselves are a thing of the past. If a Traherne or a Wordsworth were born today, he would be cured before he was 12. In short, the modern pupil is the ideal patient for those masters who, not content with teaching a subject, would create a character. helpless plasticine. Or if by chance, for nature will be nature, he should have any powers of resistance, they know how to deal with him. I am coming to that point in a moment. Secondly, the nature of the teaching has changed. In a sense, it had changed for the better. That is, it demands far more of the master and, in recompense, makes his work more interesting. It has become far more intimate and penetrating, more inward. Not content with making sure that the pupil has read and remembered the text, it aspires to teach him appreciation. It seems harsh to quarrel with what at first sounds so reasonable an aim, yet there is a danger in it. Everyone now laughs at the old test paper with its context questions and the like, and people ask, what good can that sort of thing do a boy? But surely, to demand that the test paper should do the boy good is like demanding that a thermometer should heat a room. It was the reading of the text which was supposed to do the boy good. You set the paper to find out if he had read it. And just because the paper did not force the boy to produce or to feign appreciation, it left him free to develop in private, spontaneously, as an out-of-school activity which would never earn any marks, such appreciation as he could. That was a private affair between himself and Virgil, or himself and Shakespeare. 9 times out of 10, probably nothing happened at all. But wherever appreciation did occur, and quite certainly it sometimes did, it was genuine, suited to the boy's age and character. No exotic, but the healthy growth of its native soil and weather. But when we substitute exercises in practical criticism for the old dry papers, a new situation arises. The boy will not get good marks, which means in the long run that he will not get into the managerial class, unless he produces the kind of responses and the kind of analytic method which commend themselves to his teacher. This means at best that he is trained to the precocious anticipation of responses, and of a method inappropriate to his years. At worst, it means that he is trained in the, not very difficult, art of simulating the orthodox responses. For nearly all boys are good mimics. Depend upon it, before you have been teaching for a term, everyone in the form knows pretty well the sort of stuff that goes down with prickly Popeye. In the old days also they knew what went down, but the only thing that went down was correct answers to factual questions, and there were only 2 ways of producing those, working or cheating. The thing would not be so bad if the responses which the pupils had to make were even those of the individual master. But we have already passed that stage. Somewhere, I have not yet tracked it down, there must be a kind of culture-mongers central bureau, which keeps a sharp lookout for deviationists. At least, there is certainly someone who sends little leaflets to schoolmasters, printing 6 poems on each, and telling the master not only which the pupils must be made to prefer, but exactly on what grounds. The impertinence of it! We know what Mulcaster or Boyer would have done with those leaflets. Thus, to say that, under the nascent regime, education alone will get you into the ruling class, may not mean simply that the failure to acquire certain knowledge and to reach a certain level of intellectual competence will exclude you. That would be reasonable enough. But it may come to mean, perhaps means already, something more. It means that you cannot get in without becoming, or without making your masters believe that you have become, a very specific kind of person, one who makes the right responses to the right authors. In fact, you can get in only by becoming, in the modern sense of the word, cultured. This situation must be distinguished from one that has often occurred before. Nearly all ruling classes, sooner or later, in some degree or other, have taken up culture and patronized the arts. But when that happens, the culture is the result of their position, one of the luxuries or privileges of their order. The situation we are now facing will be almost the opposite. Entry into the ruling class will be the reward of culture. Thus we reach chariontocracy. And not only is the thing likely to happen, it is already planned and avowed. Mr. J. W. Saunders has set it all out in an excellent article entitled Poetry in the Managerial Age, Essays in Criticism, July 1954. He there faces the fact that modern poets are read almost exclusively by one another. He looks about for a remedy. And naturally, he does not suggest that the poets should do anything about it. For it is taken as basic by all the culture of our age that whenever artists and audience lose touch, the fault must be wholly on the side of the audience. I have never come across the great work in which this important doctrine is proved. The remedy which occurs to Mr. Saunders is that we should provide our poets with a conscript audience, a privilege last enjoyed, I believe, by Nero. And he tells us how this can be done. We get our coordinators through eduction. Success in examinations is the road into the ruling class. All that we need do, therefore, is to make not just poetry, but the intellectual discipline which the critical reading of poetry can foster, the backbone of our educational system. In other words, practical criticism, or something of the sort, exercised no doubt chiefly on modern poets, is to be the indispensable subject, failure in which excludes you from the managerial class. And so our poets get their conscript readers. Every boy or girl who is born is presented with the choice. Read the poets whom we, the cultured, approve, and say the sort of things we say about them, or be a prole. And this, picking up on a previous point, shows how chariontocracy can deal with the minority of pupils who have tastes of their own, and are not pure plasticine. They get low marks. You kick them off the educational ladder at a low rung, and they disappear into the proletariat. Another advantage is that, besides providing poets with a conscript audience for the moment, you can make sure that the regnant literary dynasty will reign almost forever. For the deviationists whom you have kicked off the ladder will, of course, include all those troublesome types who, in earlier ages, were apt to start new schools and movements. If there had been a sound chariontocracy in their day, the young Chaucer, the young Donne, the young Wordsworth and Coleridge could have been dealt with. And thus literary history, as we have known it in the past, may come to an end. Literary man, so long a wild animal, will have become a tame one. Having explained why I think a chariontocracy probable, I must conclude by explaining why I think it undesirable. Culture is a bad qualification for a ruling class because it does not qualify men to rule. The things we really need in our rulers, mercy, financial integrity, practical intelligence, hard work, and the like, are no more likely to be found in cultured persons than in anyone else. A culture is a bad qualification in the same way as sanctity. Both are hard to diagnose and easy to feign. Of course, not every chariontocrat will be a cultural hypocrite, nor every theocrat a Tartuffe. But both systems encourage hypocrisy, and make the disinterested pursuit of the quality they profess to value more difficult. But hypocrisy is not the only evil they encourage. There are, as in piety, so in culture, states which, if less culpable, are no less disastrous. In the one we have the goody-goody, the docile youth who has neither revolted against nor risen above the routine pietisms and respectabilities of his home. His conformity has won the approval of his parents, his influential neighbours, and his own conscience. He does not know that he has missed anything and is content. In the other, we have the adaptable youth to whom poetry has always been something set for evaluation. Success in this exercise has given him pleasure, and let him into the ruling class. He does not know what he has missed, does not know that poetry ever had any other purpose, and is content. Both types are much to be pitied, but both can sometimes be very nasty. Both may exhibit spiritual pride, but each in its proper form, since the one has succeeded by acquiescence and repression, but the other by repeated victory in competitive performances. To the pride of the one, sly, simpering, and demure, we might apply Mr. Allen's word smug, especially if we let in a little of its older sense. My epithet for the other would, I think, be swaggering. It tends, in my experience, to be raw, truculent, eager to give pain, insatiable in its demands for submission, resentful and suspicious of disagreement. Where the goody-goody slinks and sidles and purrs, and sometimes scratches like a cat, his opposite number in the ranks of the cultured gobbles like an enraged turkey. And perhaps both types are less curable than the hypocrite proper. A hypocrite might, conceivably, repent and mend, or he might be unmasked and rendered innocuous. But who could bring to repentance, and who can unmask, those who were attempting no deception? who don't know that they are not the real thing because they don't know that there ever was a real thing. Lastly, I reach the point where my objections to theocracy and to chariontocracy are almost identical. Lilies that fester smell far worse than weeds. The higher the pretensions of our rulers are, the more meddlesome and impertinent their rule is likely to be, and the more the thing in whose name they rule will be defiled. The highest things have the most precarious foothold in our nature. By making sanctity or culture a moyen de parvenir, you help to drive them out of the world. Let our masters leave these two at least alone. Leave us some region where the spontaneous, the unmarketable, the utterly private can still exist. As far as I am concerned, Mr. Allen fell short of the mark when he spoke of a retreat from the faith in culture. I don't want retreat. I want attack, or, if you prefer the word, rebellion. I write in the hope of rousing others to rebel. So far as I can see, the question has nothing to do with the difference between Christians and those who, unfortunately, since the word has long borne a useful and wholly different meaning, have been called humanists. I hope that red herring will not be brought in. I would gladly believe that many atheists and agnostics care for the things I care for. It is for them I have written. To them I say, the faith in culture is going to strangle all those things unless we can strangle it first. And there is no time to spare. (105) Talking about Bicycles. Published in Resistance, October 1946, and reproduced in Present Concerns, 1991. Talking about bicycles, said my friend, I have been through the 4 ages. I can remember a time in early childhood when a bicycle meant nothing to me. It was just part of the huge, meaningless background of grown-up gadgets against which life went on. Then came a time when to have a bicycle, and to have learned to ride it, and to be at last spinning along on one's own early in the morning, under trees, in and out of the shadows, was like entering paradise. That apparently effortless and frictionless gliding, more like swimming than any other motion, but really most like the discovery of a fifth element, that seemed to have solved the secret of life. Now one would begin to be happy. But, of course, I soon reached the 3rd period. Pedalling to and fro from school, it was one of those journeys that feel uphill both ways, in all weathers, soon revealed the pros of cycling. The bicycle itself became to me what his oar is to a galley slave. But what was the 4th age? I asked. I am in it now, or rather I am frequently in it. I have had to go back to cycling lately now that there's no car, and the jobs I use it for are often dull enough. But again and again the mere fact of riding brings back a delicious whiff of memory. I recover the feelings of the 2nd age. What's more, I see how true they were, how philosophical even, for it really is a remarkably pleasant motion. To be sure, it is not a recipe for happiness, as I then thought. In that sense, the 2nd age was a mirage, but a mirage of something. How do you mean? Said I. I mean this. Whether there is, or whether there is not, in this world or in any other, the kind of happiness which one's first experience of cycling seemed to promise, still, on any view, it is something to have had the idea of it. The value of the thing promised remains, even if that particular promise was false, even if all possible promises of it are false. Sounds like a carrot in front of a donkey's nose, said I. Even that wouldn't be quite a cheat if the donkey enjoyed the smell of carrots as much as, or more than, the taste. Or suppose the smell raised in the donkey emotions which no actual eating could ever satisfy. Wouldn't he look back, when he was an old donkey living in the 4th age, and say, I'm glad I had that carrot tied in front of my nose. Otherwise I might still have thought eating was the greatest happiness. Now I know there's something far better, the something that came to me in the smell of the carrot. And I'd rather have known that, even if I'm never to get it, than to not have known it. For even to have wanted it is what makes life worth having. I don't think a donkey would feel like that at all. No, neither a four-legged donkey nor a two-legged one. But I have a suspicion that to feel that way is the real mark of a human. So that no one was human till bicycles were invented? The bicycle is only one instance. I think there are these 4 ages about nearly everything. Let's give them names. They are the unenchanted age, the enchanted age, the disenchanted age, and the re-enchanted age. As a little child, I was unenchanted about bicycles. Then, when I first learned to ride, I was enchanted. By 16 I was disenchanted, and now I am re-enchanted. Go on, said I. What are some of the other applications? I suppose the most obvious is love. We all remember the unenchanted age. There was a time when women meant nothing to us. Then we fell in love. That, of course, was the enchantment. Then, in the early or middle years of marriage, there came, well, disenchantment. All the promises had turned out, in a way, false. No woman could be expected. The thing was impossible. I don't mean any disrespect either to my own wife or to yours, but I was never married, I reminded him. Oh, that's a pity. For in that case you can't possibly understand this particular form of re-enchantment. I don't think I could explain to a bachelor how there comes a time when you look back on that first mirage, perfectly well aware that it was a mirage, and yet, seeing all the things that have come out of it, things the boy and girl could never have dreamed of, and feeling also that to remember it is, in a sense, to bring it back in reality, so that under all the experiences it is still there, like a shell lying at the bottom of a clear, deep pool, and that nothing would have happened at all without it, so that even where it was least true, it was telling you important truths in the only form you would then understand. But I see I'm boring you. Not at all, said I. Let's take an example that may interest you more. How about war? Most of our juniors were brought up unenchanted about war. The unenchanted man sees, quite correctly, the waste and cruelty, and sees nothing else. The enchanted man is in the Rupert Brooke or Philip Sidney state of mind. He's thinking of glory and battle poetry, and forlorn hopes and last stands and chivalry. Then comes the disenchanted age, say Siegfried Sassoon. But there is also a 4th stage, though very few people in modern England dare talk about it. You know quite well what I mean. One is not in the least deceived. We remember the trenches too well. We know how much of the reality the romantic view left out. But we also know that heroism is a real thing, that all the plumes and flags and trumpets of the tradition were not there for nothing. They were an attempt to honour what is truly honourable, what was first perceived to be honourable precisely because everyone knew how horrible war is. And that's where this business of the 4th age is so important. How do you mean? Isn't it immensely important to distinguish unenchantment from disenchantment, and enchantment from re-enchantment? In the poets, for instance, the war poetry of Homer, or the Battle of Maldon, for example, is re-enchantment. You see in every line that the poet knows, quite as well as any modern, the horrible thing he is writing about. He celebrates heroism, but he has paid the proper price for doing so. He sees the horror, and yet sees also the glory. In the lays of ancient Rome, on the other hand, or in Lepanto, jolly as Lepanto is, one is still enchanted. The poets obviously have no idea what a battle is like. Similarly with unenchantment and disenchantment. You read an author in whom love is treated as lust, and all war as murder, and so forth. But are you reading a disenchanted man, or only an unenchanted man? Has the writer been through the enchantment and come out onto the bleak highlands? Or is he simply a subman who is free from the love mirage as a dog is free, and free from the heroic mirage as a coward is free? If disenchanted, he may have something worth hearing to say, though less than a re-enchanted man. If unenchanted, into the fire with his book. He is talking of what he doesn't understand. But the great danger we have to guard against in this age is the unenchanted man mistaking himself for, and mistaken by others for, the disenchanted man. What were you going to say? I was just wondering whether the enchantment which you claim to look back on from the final stage was often no more than an illusion of memory. Doesn't one remember a good many more exciting experiences than one has really had? Why, yes, in a sense. Memory itself is the supreme example of the 4 ages. Wordsworth, you see, was enchanted. He got delicious gleams of memory from his early youth and took them at their face value. He believed that if he could have got back to certain spots in his own past, he would find there the moment of joy waiting for him. You are disenchanted. You have begun to suspect that those moments, of which the memory is now so ravishing, weren't at the time quite as wonderful as they now seem. You're right, they weren't. Each great experience is a whisper, which memory will warehouse as a shout. About what, then? Isn't the warehousing just as important because a particular kind of polarized light between past and present happens to be the mechanism that brings it into focus? Isn't it a fact about mountains, as good a fact as any other, that they look purple at a certain distance? If you won't have any more beer, perhaps we'd better be getting along. That man on the other side of the bar thinks we've been talking politics. I'm not sure that we haven't, said I. Oh, you're quite right. You mean that aristocracy is one other example? It was the merest enchantment to suppose that any human beings, trusted with uncontrolled powers over their fellows, would not use it for exploitation. Or even to suppose that their own standards of honour, valour, and elegance, for which alone they existed, would not soon degenerate into flash vulgarity. Hence, rightly and inevitably, the disenchantment, the age of revolutions. But the question on which all hangs is whether we can go on to re-enchantment. What would that re-enchantment be? The realization that the thing of which aristocracy was a mirage is a vital necessity, if you like. That aristocracy was right. It was only the aristocrats who were wrong. Or, putting it the other way, that a society which becomes democratic in ethos as well as in constitution is doomed. And not much loss either. '50. Good Work and Good Works. This first appeared in the Catholic Art Quarterly, then in Good Work 23, Christmas 1959, and later in The World's Last Night and Other Essays, US 1960. It is now in Screwtape Proposes a Toast, 1998. Good works, in the plural, is an expression much more familiar to modern Christendom than good work. Good works are chiefly almsgiving, or helping in the parish. They are quite separate from one's work, and good works need not be good work, as anyone can see by inspecting some of the objects made to be sold at bazaars for charitable purposes. This is not according to our example. When our Lord provided a poor wedding party with an extra glass of wine all round, he was doing good works. But also good work. It was a wine really worth drinking. Nor is the neglect of goodness in our work, our job, according to precept. The Apostle says everyone must not only work, but work to produce what is good. The idea of good work is not quite extinct among us, though it is not, I fear, especially characteristic of religious people. I have found it among cabinet-makers, cobblers, and sailors. It is no use at all trying to impress sailors with a new liner because she is the biggest or costliest ship afloat. They look for what they call her lines. They predict how she will behave in a heavy sea. Artists also talk of good work, but decreasingly. They begin to prefer words like significant, important, contemporary, or daring. These are not, to my mind, good symptoms. But the great mass of men in all fully industrialized societies are the victims of a situation which almost excludes the idea of good work from the outset. Built-in obsolescence becomes an economic necessity. Unless an article is so made that it will go to pieces in a year or two and thus have to be replaced, you will not get a sufficient turnover. 100 years ago, when a man got married, he had built for him, if he were rich enough, a carriage in which he expected to drive for the rest of his life. He now buys a car which he expects to sell again in 2 years. Work nowadays must not be good. For the wearer, zip fasteners have this advantage over buttons, that while they last, they will save him an infinitesimal amount of time and trouble. For the producer, they have a much more solid merit. They don't remain in working order long. Bad work is the desideratum. We must avoid taking a glibly moral view of this situation. It is not solely the result of original or actual sin. It has stolen upon us, unforeseen and unintended. The degraded commercialism of our minds is quite as much its result as its cause. Nor can it, in my opinion, be cured by purely moral efforts. Originally, things are made for use, or delight, or, more often, for both. The savage hunter makes himself a weapon of flint or bone, makes it as well as he can, for if it is blunt or brittle he will kill no meat. His woman makes a clay pot to fetch water in, again as well as she can, for she will have to use it. But they do not for long, if at all, abstain from decorating these things. They want to have, like Dogberry, everything handsome about them. And while they work, we may be sure they sing or whistle or at least hum. They may tell stories too. Into this situation, unobtrusive as Eden's snake, and at first as innocent as that snake once was, there must sooner or later come a change. Each family no longer makes all it needs. There is a specialist, a potter making pots for the whole village, a smith making weapons for all, a bard, poet and musician in one, singing and storytelling for all. It is significant that in Homer the smith of the gods is lame and the poet among men is blind. That may be how the thing began. The defectives, who are no use as hunters or warriors, may be set aside to provide both necessaries and recreation for those who are. The importance of this change is that we now have people making things, pots, swords, leis, not for their own use and delight, but for the use and delight of others. And of course they must, in some way or other, be rewarded for doing it. The change is necessary unless society and arts are to remain in a state, not of paradisal, but of feeble, blundering and impoverishing simplicity. It is kept healthy by 2 facts. First, these specialists will do their work as well as they can. They are right up against the people who are going to use it. You'll have all the women in the village after you if you make bad pots. You'll be shouted down if you sing a dull lay. If you make bad swords, then at best the warriors will come back and thrash you. At worst, they won't come back at all, for the enemy will have killed them, and your village will be burned, and you yourself enslaved or knocked on the head. And secondly, because the specialists are doing as well as they can something that is indisputably worth doing. They will delight in their work. We must not idealize. It will not all be delight. The smith may be overworked. The bard may be frustrated when the village insists on hearing his last lay over again, or a new one exactly like it, while he is longing to get a hearing for some wonderful innovation. But by and large, the specialists have a life fit for a man, usefulness, a reasonable amount of honour, and the joy of exercising skill. I lack space, and, of course, knowledge, to trace the whole process from this state of affairs to that in which we are living today. But I think we can now disengage the essence of the change. Granted the departure from the primitive condition in which everyone makes things for himself, and granted, therefore, a condition in which many work for others, who will pay them, there are still 2 sorts of jobs. Of one sort, a man can truly say, I am doing work which is worth doing. It would still be worth doing if nobody paid for it. But as I have no private means, and need to be fed and housed and clothed, I must be paid while I do it. The other kind of job is that in which people do work whose sole purpose is the earning of money. Work which need not be, ought not to be, or would not be done by anyone in the whole world unless it were paid. We may thank God there are still plenty of jobs in the first category. The agricultural labourer, the policeman, the doctor, the artist, the teacher, the priest, and many others are doing what is worth doing in itself. What quite a number of people would do, and do, without pay. What every family would attempt to do for itself in some amateurish fashion, if it lived in primitive isolation. Of course, jobs of this kind need not be agreeable. Ministering to a leper settlement is one of them. The opposite extreme may be represented by two examples. I do not necessarily equate them morally, but they are alike by our present classification. One is the work of the professional prostitute, the peculiar horror of her work. If you say we should not call it work, think again. The thing that makes it so much more horrible than ordinary fornication is that it is an extreme example of an activity which has no possible end in view except money. You cannot go further in that direction than sexual intercourse, not only without marriage, not only without love, but even without lust. And my other example is this. I often see a hoarding which bears a notice to the effect that thousands look at this space, and your firm ought to hire it for an advertisement of its wares. Consider by how many stages this is separated from making that which is good. A carpenter has made this hoarding. That in itself has no use. Printers and paper-makers have worked to produce the notice, worthless until someone hires the space, worthless to him until he pastes on it another notice, still worthless to him unless it persuades someone else to buy his goods, which themselves may be ugly, useless and pernicious luxuries that no mortal would have bought unless the advertisement, by its sexy or snobbish incantations, had conjured up in him a factitious desire for them. At every stage of the process, work is being done whose sole value lies in the money it brings. Such would seem to be the inevitable result of a society which depends predominantly on buying and selling. In a rational world, things would be made because they were wanted. In the actual world, wants have to be created in order that people may receive money for making the things. That is why the distrust or contempt of trade, which we find in earlier societies, should not be too hastily set down as mere snobbery. The more important trade is, the more people are condemned to, and worse still, learn to prefer, what we have called the second kind of job. Work worth doing apart from its pay, enjoyable work, and good work become the privilege of a fortunate minority. The competitive search for customers dominates international situations. Within my lifetime in England, money was, very properly, collected to buy shirts for some men who were out of work. The work they were out of was the manufacture of shirts. That such a state of affairs cannot be permanent is easily foreseen. But unfortunately, it is most likely to perish by its own internal contradictions in a manner which will cause immense suffering. It can be ended painlessly only if we find some way of ending it voluntarily. And, needless to say, I have no plan for doing that. And none of our masters, the big men behind government and industry, would take any notice if I had. The only hopeful sign at the moment is the space race between America and Russia. Since we have got ourselves into a state where the main problem is not to provide people with what they need or like, but to keep people making things, it hardly matters what, great powers could not easily be better employed than in fabricating costly objects which they then fling overboard. It keeps money circulating and factories working, and it won't do space much harm, or not for a long time. But the relief is partial and temporary. The main practical task for most of us is not to give the big men advice about how to end our fatal economy. We have none to give, and they wouldn't listen, but to consider how we can live within it as little hurt and degraded as possible. It is something even to recognize that it is fatal and insane. Just as the Christian has a great advantage over other men, not by being less fallen than they, nor less doomed to live in a fallen world, but by knowing that he is a fallen man in a fallen world. So we shall do better if we remember at every moment what good work was, and how impossible it has now become for the majority. We may have to earn our living by taking part in the production of objects which are rotten in quality, and which, even if they were good in quality, would not be worth producing, the demand or market for them having been simply engineered by advertisement. Beside the waters of Babylon, or the assembly belt, we shall still say inwardly, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its cunning." It will. And of course, we shall keep our eyes skinned for any chance of escape. If we have any choice of a career, but has one man in 1,000 any such things, we shall be after the sane jobs like greyhounds, and stick there like limpets. We shall try, if we get the chance, to earn our living by doing well what would be worth doing even if we had not our living to earn. A considerable mortification of our avarice may be necessary. It is usually the insane jobs that lead to big money. They are often also the least laborious. But beyond all this there is something subtler. We must take great care to preserve our habits of mind from infection by those which the situation has bred. Such an infection has, in my opinion, deeply corrupted our artists. Until quite recently, until the latter part of the last century, it was taken for granted that the business of the artist was to delight and instruct his public. There were, of course, different publics. The street songs and the oratorios were not addressed to the same audience, though I think a good many people liked both. And an artist might lead his public on to appreciate finer things than they had wanted at first. But he could do this only by being, from the first, if not merely entertaining, yet entertaining, and if not completely intelligible, yet very largely intelligible. All this has changed. In the highest aesthetic circles, one now hears nothing about the artist's duty to us. It is all about our duty to him. He owes us nothing. We owe him recognition, even though he has never paid the slightest attention to our tastes, interests, or habits. If we don't give it to him, our name is mud. In this shop, the customer is always wrong. But this change is surely part of our changed attitude to all work. As giving employment becomes more important than making things men need or like, there is a tendency to regard every trade as something that exists chiefly for the sake of those who practice it. The smith does not work in order that the warriors may fight. The warriors exist and fight in order that the smith may be kept busy. The bard does not exist in order to delight the tribe. The tribe exists in order to appreciate the bard. In industry, highly creditable motives, as well as insanity, lie behind this change of attitude. A real advance in charity stopped us talking about surplus population and started us talking instead about unemployment. The danger is that this should lead us to forget that employment is not an end in itself. We want people to be employed only as a means to their being fed, believing, whether rightly who knows, that it is better to feed them for making things badly than for doing nothing. But though we have a duty to feed the hungry, I doubt whether we have a duty to appreciate the ambitious. This attitude to art is fatal to good work. Many modern novels, poems, and pictures, which we are browbeaten into appreciating, are not good work because they are not work at all. They are mere puddles of spilled sensibility or reflection. When an artist is in the strict sense working, he of course takes into account the existing taste, interests, and capacity of his audience. These, no less than the language, the marble, or the paint, are part of his raw material, to be used, tamed, sublimated, not ignored or defied. Haughty indifference to them is not genius nor integrity. It is laziness and incompetence. You have not learned your job. Hence, real honest-to-God work, so far as the arts are concerned, now appears chiefly in lowbrow art, in the film, the detective story, the children's story. These are often sound structures, seasoned wood, accurately dovetailed, the stresses all calculated, skill and labour successfully used to do what is intended. I do not misunderstand. The highbrow productions may, of course, reveal a finer sensibility and profounder thought. But a puddle is not a work, whatever rich wines or oils or medicines have gone into it. Great works of art and good works of charity had better also be good work. Let choirs sing well or not at all. Otherwise, we merely confirm the majority in their conviction that the world of business, which does with such efficiency so much that never really needed doing, is the real, the adult, and the practical world, and that all this culture and all this religion, horrid words both, are essentially marginal, amateurish, and rather effeminate activities.